60 meters under the sea, off a rocky headland in southern Turkey, lies a flat disk of blue glass about the size of a dinner plate. It is not a bowl. It is not a bead. It is raw material, a lump of color waiting to be melted and shaped by somebody who never received it. There were about 175 of these discs down there. Most are deep cobalt blue. Some are turquoise. One is pale purple. They are the oldest glass ingots anyone has ever found. That same blue turns up in Egyptian jewelry and in painted palace rooms in Greece, hundreds of miles apart. Hold on to that one blue disc. It is the thread running through everything else on that slope, and this story keeps coming back to it. In the summer of 1982, a Turkish sponge diver named Mehmet Kaka was working the water near Uluburun, a name that means Grand Cape. He surfaced and described the strange things lying on the slope below him. Metal biscuits with ears, he called them. His captain had been shown drawings of exactly that shape by archaeologists, and he passed the description along to the museum at Bodrum. The biscuits with ears were copper ingots, cast as flat slabs with four handle-like corners. Archaeologists already had a name for them: oxide ingots. Divers went down to look. They found more. Then more again. The whole slope was covered, ingots sliding down a steep rock face towards deeper water. And underneath the copper, pressed flat by 3,000 years, lay the blue glass discs. Digging the wreck out took 11 summers, from 1984 to 1994. The Institute of Nautical Archaeology ran it, led by George Bass and later Semel Polak. The site sat between roughly 44 and 61 meters down, on a slope so steep that anything dropped was simply gone. At that depth a diver gets about 20 minutes of work, twice a day, before the air itself starts making them slow and muddled. They made more than 22,000 dives. Every ingot, every bead, every seed was measured and mapped where it lay before anyone lifted it. It is one of the most carefully recorded underwater digs ever done, and it had to be. The real value of this wreck was never the objects on their own. It is knowing which object was sitting next to which. The copper came first, and there was a lot of it. 354 oxide ingots, roughly 10 tons in total, stacked in overlapping rows the way you would tile a roof. Each one weighs about as much as a large suitcase, and the four corners are there so a person can grip it, or sling it over a donkey. Tests on the metal point to Cyprus, which was the copper island of the age. What stands out is how standard they are. Same shape, same rough weight, cast to a pattern that traders all along the coast would recognize on sight. It is the Bronze Age version of a shipping pallet, a lump of value cut into units everyone has agreed on, so nobody has to argue about what it is worth. Then there is the tin, about 1 ton of it. That number matters more than it looks. Bronze is made by mixing roughly 10 parts copper with 1 part tin, and this ship was carrying almost exactly that ratio. So this was not a random pile of metal. It was a recipe, loaded in the correct proportions, enough bronze to arm a small army with swords, helmets, and tools. The catch is that there is almost no tin in the Mediterranean. It had to come from far away. A 2022 study of the chemical signatures pointed towards mines in Central Asia and in Anatolia. Other researchers disagree with parts of that reading, and the argument is genuinely not settled. What is certain is that the tin traveled overland for months before it ever met the sea. The ship itself was about 15 meters long, roughly the length of a bus, and built of cedar. The planks were joined edge to edge with wooden tongues slotted into cut sockets, then locked with pegs, so the shell held together before any ribs went in. It is strong, slow work, and the same method was still being used 1,000 years later. On board were 24 stone anchors, a heavy, blunt design used along the coast of what is now Lebanon, Syria, and Israel. That is one of the few solid hints about where the ship came from. Brushwood was packed into the bottom to stop the cargo grinding the hull. And wedged in among all of it, stacked like plates in a cupboard, sat the blue discs. Now the cargo widens out. About 150 tall clay jars of a type made on the Canaanite coast, most of them holding a sticky yellow resin from the terebinth tree, roughly a ton of it in total. It was burned as incense in temples, or used in perfume. There were logs of a hard black African wood the Egyptians prized for furniture. There were elephant tusks and hippopotamus teeth, both carved into ivory. There were ostrich egg shells, which people cut and fitted with rims to make containers. There were tortoise shells, possibly meant to become the sound boxes of stringed instruments. Almost none of this is finished goods. It is raw stuff, headed for workshops. Somebody at the other end was waiting to turn all of it into something else. Then the small things start appearing, and they are stranger than the cargo. A solid gold scarab beetle carved with the name of Nefertiti, Queen of Egypt. It is the only scarab with her name ever found, and it turned up on a ship on the seabed, not in a tomb. There was a gold cup, gold pendants, and gold scrap, cut up as if it were being carried by weight rather than as jewelry. There were amber beads, and the amber came from the Baltic, up in northern Europe, which means it crossed a continent hand to hand before reaching this hull. There was a carved stone cylinder seal from Babylon that was already centuries old when the ship went down. Somebody was carrying an antique. Nobody knows whether they knew it was one. Count the origins and you reach about 11. Mycenaean Greece. The Canaanite coast. Cyprus. Egypt. Kassite Babylon. Assyria. Nubia, south of Egypt. The Balkans. Sicily or southern Italy. The Baltic shore of northern Europe. And inland Anatolia. 11 separate worlds, with different kings, different gods, and different scripts, all represented inside one wooden hull about the length of a bus. It works rather like the phone in your pocket, which holds metals from a dozen countries that have never agreed on much. What the wreck proves is that this network was already running smoothly in 1300 BC. Not occasional contact. Not rare luxury gifts. A working supply chain, with standard weights, standard ingot shapes and known routes. And it was fragile in exactly the way our own supply chains are fragile. Among the wreckage was a small wooden object with 2 leaves and an ivory hinge, folded shut like a pocket book. Each leaf had a shallow tray cut into it. Those trays were filled with wax, and a scribe would scratch letters into the wax with a pointed stylus, then smooth it flat and use it again. It is the oldest object shaped like a book that anyone has ever found. It is also the most frustrating thing on the ship. The wax is long gone, dissolved by the sea. Whatever was written there is simply not there anymore. A ship carrying this much metal would have had a list of what it held, who sent it, and where it was going. That list was on board. And the page is blank. So the question stands, and it is the whole question of this wreck. Was this a royal shipment or a business venture? Kings of that age wrote to each other constantly. Letters found at Amarna in Egypt show rulers sending each other copper, glass, gold, and horses, calling every load a gift while quietly keeping score. This cargo does look like that kind of shipment. It is huge, it is high quality, and it is oddly complete. But the ship also carried sets of balance weights in several different systems, the tools of a trader who needs to buy and sell in more than one town. That looks like private business. Both readings fit the same pile of objects. Archaeologists have argued it for 40 years without agreement, and the evidence has not moved. There is a second unanswered question: whose ship was it? The anchors and the jars point to the Canaanite coast, so the hull and most of the crew were probably from there. But scattered through the wreck were personal items of a different kind. 2 swords of a Greek style. 2 sets of seals. Razors and small tools of the sort a Mycenaean man would carry. Semel Polluck argued that 2 Mycenaeans were aboard, possibly officials traveling with the cargo, or people escorting a shipment home. Others point out that objects travel perfectly well without their owners, and a sword can be trade goods like anything else. Nobody can tell the difference on the seabed. The personal effects of a passenger and the merchandise of a merchant look exactly the same after 3,000 years. The small ordinary things survive too, and they bring the crew closer than the gold does. Olives, figs, almonds, pomegranates, coriander seeds, fish hooks and net weights, because you fish while you sail. Oil lamps with soot still on the rim. Somebody on that ship ate lunch and lit a lamp at dusk. How it went down is unknown. The cliff there drops straight into deep water, and a ship pinned against it by wind has nowhere to go. A shifting cargo of 10 tons of copper would end an argument fast. Whether anyone reached the shore is also unknown. The rock is close enough to swim, if you are not trapped under the load. The wreck did not preserve enough of the crew to answer it either way. The date comes from firewood. One log kept for the ship's cooking fire still had its tree rings, and matching them against known ring patterns puts the trees felling shortly after 1316 BC. So the ship sank around 1320 to 1300 BC, give or take. Now hold that date against what came next. Within roughly a century, most of the 11 worlds in that cargo hold were gone. The city of Ugarit burned. The Hittite capital was abandoned. The great Mycenaean palaces burned one after another. Egypt survived, but shrank. Why it happened is still argued: long drought, earthquakes, seaborne raiders, or a trading system so tangled that one broken link took down all of it. Nobody sailing that ship could have known. The network looked its strongest just before it stopped. Which brings it back to the glass. Those discs were raw color, cast somewhere in Egypt or on the Syrian coast, headed for a workshop that would melt them down into beads, inlays, or the deep blue fittings of a palace room. Every other object on that ship has an argument attached to it. The tin has an argument. The owner has an argument. The root has an argument. The glass has none, because glass does not rot and does not corrode, and what came up looks almost exactly as it did the day it was loaded. It is still the color somebody chose. It was made to become something, and the order it was traveling to fill was written on a wax page that the sea wiped clean. It never got there. More forgotten history every week. Subscribe so it isn't lost twice.